GOP senators are actually pushing back on the Trump administration for keeping them in the dark, not just about Venezuela strikes, but a host of other bizarre DoD policies that seem to go against Congress's wishes. Just what does the Constitution have to say about Congress's role in foreign policy? And the real story might not even be Congress themselves. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so GOP senators are at least firing some shots at the Pentagon's policy chief over information sharing. Now, I want to point out that we're going to hear a familiar name in this article, and that's because, well, it feels increasingly like the individual in this article feels that they're completely unbound by basically anyone. Now, several Republican senators are lambasting the Department of Defense's policy office and its leader for not keeping the Senate Armed Services Committee informed of the major decisions in the Department of Defense, including the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Romania and the halting of assistance to Ukraine. According to Dan Sullivan, a senator, a Republican senator from Alaska, says, quote, "It looks like some of the big decisions coming out of the policy shop at the Pentagon are undermining what the president's trying to get done. This is what passes for criticism." Now, bear in mind, if this was a Biden Pentagon, you can bet they wouldn't say, well, I think he's undermining poor Joe Biden. He'd say, this is Joe Biden's fault, right? Because, well, frankly, when you're the commander in chief, you're responsible for everything your people do. And that office is going to start sharing information when the Secretary of Defense or the president, they're exactly one phone call away from getting in line. But you also see that, in fact, the name of the policy shop is ding, 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 Elbridge Colby, the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, who lawmakers said is impossible to reach, which is not what you want to be. If you're Senate confirmed and the Congress, as we've talked about, has a total right to conduct oversight of the Department of Defense. There is no facility, there is no person, there is no program that appropriate congressional oversight authorities cannot access. That is intrinsic to the function of Congress. And so you are never hard to reach. You are never hard to come by. Whatever you are doing, it is less important than congressional oversight. The Constitution makes that clear, right? In fact, according to Dan Sullivan, he said, quote, "You know who the hardest guy to get a hold of in the Trump administration is? The Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. I hope he's watching. I'm meeting with him tomorrow. Maybe he'll cancel on me. I don't know." Again, Elbridge Colby, you might know, is notoriously, he billed himself as a China hawk, right? He says, oh, I think that the U.S. is in great power competition with the People's Republic of China, and we need to orient our military towards containing China and supporting our allies in the Pacific. But to that effect, he has withdrawn support for, again, Ukraine. He's moved brigades out of Romania. He's done all of these actions, withdrawn from the Baltics, provided less assistance to the Baltic countries. The problem is that these don't make any sense. They only make sense if the goal is to simply empower Russia and reduce the commitment of the United States to defending our NATO allies. And to this effect, right, the reason is because combat brigades, Army combat brigades, do not have much of a role in the Pacific fight, right? The fight in the Pacific is a naval conflict first and foremost. And the fact is that U.S. land assets provide a huge bolster to our NATO allies who, again, Russia is currently working tirelessly to oppose. But the other takeaway is that one of Russia's key allies, the key ally in their war of aggression against Ukraine, is China. So for China, they believe that Russia's winning the conflict in Ukraine is essential to their foreign policy, right? It is unbelievably important to them. And so why then is the U.S. Undersecretary of Defense for Policy saying, well, yeah, China China wants Russia to succeed, but we don't really care if Russia wins or not. We should deliberately weaken NATO, right? And certainly in the event that that we call on our NATO allies to assist us in the event of a conflict with China over, say, Taiwan, we probably want NATO to like us. And again, the assets in this country. So Elbridge Colby has been very weird. He has this ideology, but he does not but his actions don't even align with it. That's what makes it so bizarre. Here he is here, right? Again, he believes that aiding Ukraine jeopardizes America's focus on China. He said, Ukraine should not be the focus. The best way to avoid war with China is to be manifestly prepared, such that Beijing recognizes that an attack on Taiwan is likely to fail. We need a hawk to get to a place where we can be a dove. It's about a balance of power. It's America's interest. But then he later wrote that it's in America's interest to avoid Ukrainian defeat, but we must pursue that in a manner consistent with the highest priority of a formidable defense of Asia's first island chain. He opposes Ukrainian membership in NATO and supports European countries to commit more resources to countering Russia and bolstering their militaries. None of which is crazy, but one, I want to point out that there's a level of unhingedness to all this, because bear in mind, right? Let's look up U.S. aid to Ukraine by year, right? And we're going to learn something really fun. See, remember, guys, the U.S. defense budget, by the way, lads, is $1 trillion. That's about 900 billion. So I want you to understand that since the invasion over 3 years, so we've averaged, we'll say 130 billion, and that's Pentagon math. Pentagon math always makes number look big, bigger than it is. But if we use the 130 billion, right? And let's actually add it in. Let's round it up. Let's say 200 billion. We spent 200 billion on it. Okay. Which is a lot. And again, 40 billion of that, not even military funds. Some of it was old equipment that we've simply valued as though it were new. Again, the Abrams that Ukraine received, for example, were 30 years old. The F-16s they received were like Block Bs, right? And so when we look at that, we say, okay, in the last 3 years, we have spent 3 trillion or 3,000 billions of dollars on our defense. And of that 3,000 billions we've spent, we've dropped 200, about 6% of that on assistance to Ukraine. If we wanted to blow Russia out of the fucking water, right? Let's say we doubled our assistance to Ukraine and we spent 12% of our defense budget, leaving, by the way, guys, 88% to counter China, to fight terror, to do every other thing that we need to do, murder drug boats, murder fishermen in Venezuela, whatever it is. Like, this idea that he goes, well, it's not a priority, we can't do it, is stupid. It's just ignorance. It does not reflect real priorities. And we've talked about the fact that some of these priority shifts are good, right? Like, for example, reducing combat aviation brigades in favor of an increasing drone and automation system. I think that's great. But here's the thing. If you want to do it, one, if you have different priorities, if you're the policy chief and you want a different force structure, you have to go through Congress. They control the checkbook, right? But here's the thing. Another senator from Mississippi, a staunch Republican, echoed Sullivan's view, slammed the Pentagon Policy Office over what he said is a lack of information sharing, right? He said, quote, I've been disappointed to find one exception to the cordiality. Members and staff of this committee have struggled to receive information from the policy office and not been able to consult in a meaningful way with the shop, either on national defense strategy or global posture review, i.e., what are we doing and where are we doing it? That's a pretty big thing to not know about your military. Changes, again, include withdrawing a rotational brigade from Romania, the DoD review of the Auckland U.S. submarine pact, Pentagon's pause on shipments to Ukraine, which were illegal earlier this year. Again, but that's not the only criticism of the Trump DoD, right? We're also seeing Republican senators like Mike Turner, for example, and this is the core of this argument here. Mike Turner, a Republican from Ohio, said lawmakers were very frustrated with a bipartisan House classified briefing on Thursday on the U.S. military strikes against drug trafficking boats in the Caribbean and Far East Pacific, right? Echoing displeasure raised by Democrats. right? Now, Turner, who attended a members-only House Armed Services Committee, this is the designated congressional oversight of classified military activities. This is how oversight's supposed to work, walked out saying people were very frustrated at the information being provided. It was a bipartisan briefing, but people were not happy with the level of information that was provided and certainly the level of legal justification that was provided. This is, again, a Republican congressman telling MSNBC. House Democrats said almost the exact same thing. They were not satisfied with the answers they received. The administration didn't offer any legal justification. They said, what I heard was a tactical brief. I heard no strategy, no endgame, no assessment of how they're going to end the flow of drugs into the United States, which needs to happen. Right? This is from Representative Jason Crow, a Democrat and former U.S. Army officer. Democrat Seth Muldoon from Massachusetts said it was briefed by some policy folks and an admiral from the special operations. They said, quote, they admitted all of the narcotics coming out of this part of the world is cocaine. They talked a little bit about the connection between cocaine and fentanyl, but I'm not convinced that what they said was accurate. This is according to another Democratic representative. But here's what I want to say is that we're seeing criticism focusing on the legal justification, right? And we're seeing more and more of this. Republicans in Congress are, again, Republican Senator Mike Rounds, a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, said, quote, we, the Senate, have oversight responsibilities. We expect to get our questions answered, he said in an interview with the New York Times. Republican Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina said, quote, I think we've got to be very careful when you're talking about ordering a kinetic strike, he told the Times. Republican Senator Susan Collins of Maine said, quote, there are legitimate questions about the legality of Trump strikes without congressional authority. Collins said she would like to see the Senate, quote, pass a resolution that either authorizes his force or prevents its use, right? And a Republican congressman from Oklahoma told C-SPAN that the White House, quote, needs to give insight to Congress about the military strikes. He continued, if this were happening with the level of insight under the Biden administration, I'd be apoplectic. Rand Paul has been even more clear, right? Said that describing these strikes as extrajudicial killings. He said, quote, no one said their name. No one said what evidence. No one said whether they're armed. And we've had no evidence presented, he told Fox News on Sunday. And he continued, quote, the Constitution says when you go to war, Congress has to vote on it. He added that the, quote, drug war is something that's typically been done through domestic law enforcement. So at this point, he says, I would call them extrajudicial killings, akin to what China does, akin to what Iran does with drug dealers, right? And what I want to point out is that these are real criticisms that are being leveled by the Republican senators and congressmen who back up Trump. This is his own party. And Trump has basically given them the big middle finger. Justice Department tells Congress that Trump doesn't need approval for strikes on alleged drug boats, that what happening isn't even hostilities at all. You're confused. This isn't hostilities. And this talk about regime change of Maduro, still not hostilities, right? It's also not a law enforcement action, though. It's just, at some point, you're just talking about random murder. But here's what I thought was insane. Here is the real gripe of this story. Fox News. By the way, guys, Fox News is the most watched. It is the largest media outlet in the United States. It is the mainstream media, okay? Now, listen to this. GOP lawmakers, the headline says, rally behind Trump's Venezuela strikes as critics question legality, right? They say Democrats call the strikes extrajudicial, while Republicans defend the president's authority to protect U.S. sovereignty. That's not what this story is at all. We just showed you the exact opposite, right? Now, here's what I thought was wild. You just heard Rand Paul say cite the Constitution, cite congressional oversight, cite U.S. law and authorization, declarations of war, congressional authorization of use of force, the War Powers Resolution. Listen to what Fox News says. Critics call the Trump administration's campaign illegal under international law, a charge supporters dismiss as irrelevant to America's international security. It continues, while international law helps create legal, technical, or moral consensus, it is powerless to restrain President Donald Trump's decision to attack vessels the administration sees as threats to the U.S. This is wild. Now, it cites, again, a UN Commissioner for Human Rights who says the U.S. hasn't provided enough authority. None of the individuals on the boats appear to be an imminent threat to the lives of others or justify the use of lethal armed force under international law. Now, as we've always talked about on this channel, international law is a series of suggestions. There is no international cops that will put you in international country jail. It doesn't exist. It's mostly, again, Fox News accurately describes it as largely moral consensus and norm building. But nowhere in this article, in fact, describes the actual argument, right? Nowhere does it say anything about authorization for use of military force. It's buried. All of this. It cites Democrats, right? And it cites, again, like saying that, here's one, for example, a representative from California said, quote, President Trump as commander-in-chief has an inherent constitutional authority under Article 2 to defend America's national security interests and protect American lives. Cartels we're targeting are designated as an FTO and hold real responsibility for the fentanyl crisis. Since 2021 has claimed more American lives than all service members lost in combat since World War II. Yeah, but the Constitution says that Congress declares war, that Congress has to authorize the use of military force. And the War Powers Resolution is Congress's solution to that. So you can't sit there and say he has the authority to do these strikes, but then ignore the parts of the Constitution that say otherwise. And again, the fact is that none of these GOP critics made it into this article. It continues, despite a lack of power from international law to meaningfully restrain the U.S. and other lawmakers expressed concern that Trump hasn't provided more justification for its attacks, right? Other Democrats have called the attacks extrajudicial, demanding more information from the administration on its justification for its strikes, right? Again, at the bottom, they cite a Democrat who said the same thing the Republicans did, that the briefing was incredible for how little information was shared, how little time the briefers stayed to answer questions, and how absent any credible legal rationale was from the administration's unauthorized ongoing expansion of these strikes. The American people deserve transparency and accountability and truth about what the government is doing in their name. This is insane. And then it gives the administration, repeats an administration line from X. That is the absurdity here. Nowhere in this article does congressional authorization, does the War Powers Resolution appear, does the constitutional mandate for Congress to declare war and authorize military force. Nowhere does that appear. It is completely absent, as is the, again, half dozen GOP senators who dissented. It literally just lies and says that the GOP totally backs him and that only the Democrats care and that only the Democrats are only citing vague international law. This is why this is why this stuff makes me tear my hair out, proverbially. Because a huge portion of the U.S. public is just being lied to about fundamental aspects of how the country is run. They don't seem to have any interest or care about what it means to have three co-equal branches of government, what it means to have a foreign policy in a democracy, and one set up like the United States. You can't claim to love all the protections the Constitution grants you, the freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom, the Second Amendment. You can't claim to love those things, but then also poo-poo the parts of the Constitution that say that Congress, not the president, declares war, that Congress, not the president, controls the power of the purse, right? That the president isn't allowed to go passing around a hat, collecting money from his friends and companies he regulates to redo the White House. Congress decides when the buildings and infrastructure of the U.S. are renovated and how much funds they're going to allocate to it. None of these things appear in the Constitution. And again, so if you give a shit about the Second Amendment, you probably should give a shit about all the rest of it too. It's only 9 pages. You should read it. There's some wild stuff in there. Anyway, guys, become a member at Combat Vet News. That's the best way to support the channel. And even better now that you can now purchase Combat Vet News memberships via YouTube. Just hit the Become a Member link right there in YouTube, and it'll get you access to the Uncensored Combat videos. We'll give you a login. And, of course, thanks to our Lieutenant tier members who always support us. And thanks to all of our Colonel tier members, guys like Alfred Chesky, Alan Knutson, Christine Schumann, Dem, and Deborah Oppenheimer. Thank you, guys. Cheers.